Alright, after you have decided what size you want to make your comic, and you have some script, you can start with thumbnails. I didn't used to do thumbnails when I first got into comics, and this is kind of a problem. I do them a lot now. Well, I do them all the time now. And what thumbnails allow you to do is break down what shots you want and break down the motion in each page, and helps you end a page with, you always want to end a page with a slight cliffhanger, like not over the top, but enough that the person wants to turn to the next page. And so using thumbnails will help you get good angles and good shot choices where you can pull in and get more tension and pull out and show more things. And it just helps you break down. Thumbnails also you can do more than one and for each page and say, oh, I like this shot better, and oh, that one was really stupid. And it just helps you work out a lot of decisions that are going to be harder to make later. These are actually thumbnails from a project I'm working on right now, so that's what they look like. You can make them as stupidly stick figure as you want, as scribbles, and honestly, unless you're working with like a writer, no one has to read them but you.
And see, I work in the opposite direction. The tighter I make my thumbnails, the easier it makes it for me to my finished page, because it's less work I have to do later. It's easier to work small and then blow up and go big than it is to work big and you have to make corrections.
After you do the thumbnails, you go to roughs, which are usually, I use mine about 6 by 9 inches, and so that's letter page size. And this is, you just refine everything you did in your thumbnails. A lot of these are the same pages that were on the previous page. I've worked out the character acting and their expressions, and then worked in the backgrounds so that I know what's going on there. The more work you do in these earlier stages, the easier the later ones are going to be for you. The more fun of making a comic is actually going to be. Because all of this, working out all of this, it's just, when you get to inking, that's very zen, I think, is doing the final renders of the comic. That's fun, that's making art. This is, what you're doing is telling a story. And so you've got to work out your storytelling here, but
the page before you had,
yes.
This isn't impressive. No one's going to look at this and be like, you're a great artist, I really love your stuff. The inking, that's when people are going to come up and be like, oh, that's really cool. So that's also part of what's fun about it, is you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, I really like this line. Whereas here, this is the heavy lifting of the comic. This is the backbone. It needs to be strong. So it can actually be really tiring. It takes me longer to do this than it does to ink. Because with ink, you're never just tracing when you're inking. But if you've been doing it long enough, it's second nature, and you know what's supposed to have a heavier line, what's supposed to be delicate. With this, it's never second nature. You're always pushing for different shot choices, for more interesting shot choices, for things that people haven't done before.
And then once you get to inking, well, pencils and inks is when I'm talking about like mainstream comics, like, you know, DC, Marvel, superhero, they a lot of times will have another step in between doing roughs and doing inks, is they'll have someone who does pencils. And so they take all that and put in the pencils, and it looks just like this, except it's pencils and not inks. And then this, I just go right to ink, but I've had a little bit more experience with it. And so, inks, I mean, it's a little bit more permanent. It's the final step, more or less, and you can make mistakes that you correct either with white ink or Photoshop, but this is when you really start, you're like, this is my comic. And it takes a while to get to the inking step of a comic. Is I'll spend weeks on roughs, and then when I get to inks, I can do those pretty fast. I mean, it's still a large piece, it still takes a while, but that's a lot easier. If you want to add tones, you can use various programs. Photoshop, you can make fake tones in. You can also use Manga Studio, have a lot of tones. Ink wash or watercolor will make great tones. That's what the one on the far left is. And then you can use Copic markers. You can even use pencils if you want. And of course there's colored comics as well. You don't see these much in manga, but for like internet comics, when you're Yeah, and European comics where you can kind of do whatever you want. They're easier. The one on the left is traditional media, it's watercolor and color pencil. The one on the right is Photoshop. And really, the secret to becoming an awesome comic artist, practicing a lot. I'm 26 years old, which I've been doing comics since I was 13, and I've been to both a undergrad and a graduate program to do this, and worked for 2 years as an illustrator. Plus, I've been, making comics for that whole time. So I'm not just like wake up one day, oh, I'm going to be a great comic artist. If you think about some of the other comic artists out there, Eiichiro Oda is kind of the exception to the rule because he's young and he's successful. He's in his, is he 30 yet?
He was 30 a little while ago.
Okay.
A few years ago.
When he started.
He's early 30s.
Yeah, when he started, he was in his mid-20s and doing it, but they have an apprentice system in Japan. Most comic artists, they're going to be in their 30s when they get their big break. It's just putting in a lot of hours. Everyone says you've got to put in 10,000 hours before you get your big break. It's true. It's a lot of practicing. It's a lot of drawing. That's really the secret. The other thing, read comics. Read a lot of them. And you probably all read a lot of manga, am I right? Yeah. Read more. Read a variety. Read ones that are critically acclaimed. Read American comics. I'm not just talking like Batman, Superman type stuff. Read a lot of stuff that Oni Press puts out. They put out like Super Pro KO. They put a lot of, and I want to say American manga, but it's not. But
it's very much inspired.
It's very much inspired by manga. And honestly, when we do comics, that's probably what we're going to wind up working for. Top Shelf for a second. Vertigo is really cool. They do a little bit more like realistic style stuff, but it's usually like film noir type comics. They're pretty cool. If you do like superhero stuff, I actually recommend Marvel's Journey into Mystery. That's my favorite right now. And then there's
Arctic Press.
Arctic Press. There's all I'm also tired.
Yes, there's also a lot of there's smaller publishers who put out really great work that that their books are on my shelf, but I can't remember who publishes what.
It's like we have like shelves and shelves of comic, and like I can't even think of one now.
There's also always Kickstarter. You can always publish yourself.
There's a lot of independent publishers. There's a lot of people who go to conventions that sell comics. There's web comics, lots and lots of web comics. If you guys don't know the site Piperka, Piperka, it's a webcomic organization site where it lists webcomics and then it tells you when they update. So it's a great site to have. It goes through and browse all kinds of webcomics.
Is that the orange one? The background's orange?
It has a pepper. It's called Piperka, P-I-P-E. They might have changed it so the background was orange, but the last I remember it was white.
I went browsing for webcomics and I don't remember the name of it. It had like something like 100 and some pages worth.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more than just that one out there that organize all of them. And so there's a lot of webcomic artists out there, a lot of really good stuff. And so, the more you read, we learn how to storytell from example. We learn how to draw from example as well. And so the more and the wider variety you get is going to help you become a better storyteller. It's like just reading stories, is you'll never learn how to tell a story unless you read them. That's the big secret. I think that's actually, that's all I have. But please, ask questions.
What would you say about like the artist who actually does everything with like the tablets and things like that, to actually do everything on their computer instead of actually having a pen and paper to do it?
That's just as legitimate. Yeah. We have a friend who does a webcomic completely by computer. She never.
In fact, she uses Google SketchUp. I don't necessarily agree with this, but whatever. She uses Google SketchUp and she makes the basic forms of like buildings and such, and then traces over that with backgrounds because she's doing a page a week.
Yeah.
And anyone who is doing a webcomic and going to school and doing paperwork knows there's just not enough time in the day. So if you're making your own models and you already understand perspective like she does, it's a great tool, but I honestly don't recommend it as a cheat or a crutch because you're never going to get any better unless you learn how to do it.
Right. But no, she's a side painter and she does the whole thing digitally. So I like working traditionally. That's my favorite way to do it. But she likes working digitally. That's her favorite way to do it. And it's really what works best for you is the way that you should do it.
Are there any recommendations for like people who used to like sketch and doodle and haven't in like years? Or like wanting to, they know that they that they still can, but they just like what would be good start?
I would get back into the habit with some good how to draw books. Every few years I revisit because there's always something new that I can do, so I learn a new skill because I'm finally able to understand what they're talking about. I highly recommend Andrew Loomis's series of books. He was a great illustrator, and he really knows what he's talking about. I wouldn't read them on their own because he skips certain steps and doesn't explain things very clearly. I'm also a big fan of Glenn Milpou. He worked for Disney, and he's got this beautiful way of describing anatomy that really speaks to me, and his methods are very easily understood. Walt Stanchfield published 2 books called Drawn to Life, Volume 1 and 2, which, while they're not so much how to draw books in themselves, they're more how to think like an artist books, which are excellent. Betty Edwards has Thinking on the Right Side of the Brain, which is good if you're finding it hard to get back into that artistic mindset and just draw from life all the time.
The other recommendation is just having a sketchbook and drawing all the time. Is sketchbooks like these, I'll go through about one of them every month and a half. And it's just because when I'm eating, well, not like when I'm eating, but if I go out, waiting for food, if I go out to food, when I have a few minutes, when I'm bored or whatever, sketchbook drawing, whether it's drawing what's around me or drawing from imagination, it's just, I've always got one.
Would you have any tips for drawing for imagination? Because I ask because, I'm considered a copy artist. I can see anything, I'm not tracing, I can actually duplicate it, pretty well. So do you have any tips on how to take it from there? Because it's like, I can even see, I can see images that I want to draw, I think, these are the brush strokes or the pencil marks that I need to make, but when it comes to actually doing it, it doesn't actually come out, so.
Some of it's just going to be practice.
Understanding how the objects you want to draw but aren't physically in front of you, understanding how they're constructed, the basic shapes that make them up, it goes a really, really long way. Drawing from imagination is really just drawing from memorization, things that you've drawn a million times and then being able to modify them so they suit your needs. So let's say I want to draw a robot fighting girl with pink pigtails. Well, I've drawn a million girls. I've drawn a fair amount of cars. I've even drawn some mechs based on other people's illustrations. So mentally, I cobble those all together. And something that can help when you're drawing from imagination is a lot of people don't draw like tiny thumbnails of what they want to do. They try to draw the finished piece all at one time. I will draw several thumbnails because that's a lot of pressure to get it right on the first time. And if you fail at a larger size, you're going to feel terrible. Like you've got this big thing that just didn't work out in front of your face. So by having like 6 or 7 thumbnails, it doesn't matter if they didn't work out. And you can noodle with like how you're going to design her armor or how you put up her hair or her face shape and not care if it's a failure. And then once you have the design settled in and you understand how she's constructed, you can do it at a larger scale and you'll have a greater success rate. Because, I mean, there's a lot of failure. I fail all the time, but I understand that I'm going to fail, and I don't get discouraged when I fail, and I rip out the sheet. Actually, I keep the sheet because I like having progress of my failures and successes. I move to a new sheet, or I erase everything. Like, if you watch me draw a comic page, it's like 16 hours of erasing with 3 hours of actual successful drawing. And it's a numbers game. It's just how it is. And you get really discouraged when you only look at other artists who put their successful work online, because all you're seeing is their successes, so it looks like they never fail. So you just, a big part of drawing from imagination and getting back into drawing is just overcoming your discouragement and keeping with it.
Also, using photo references to cobble together, art isn't
Cheating at all.
cheating at all. Like, I mean, if you say, oh, look, that face, the way it's pointed, that's exactly what I want, but I want a different body, and then, I want this armor on it. Look up references for all those things, and, it's putting all the references together mentally. That's part of imagination.